time.
Sorry.
Thanks, Heather. This is a really good time to start, thinking about extended school year, making some plans. So let me share my screen. We can get moving here. Get all my buttons pushed here. Okay. Is my child making progress? Let's look at the data. Don't be scared of the word data. We look at it every day. We're looking at the prices of stuff and, it bombards us. We just don't think of it sometimes as data. So don't let it scare you. We'll make this as easy as possible. Try and keep yourself muted. You can raise your hand if you want to say something. Use the chat to make comments or ask questions. Look, this is a kind of a long PowerPoint. We're going to try and get through with everything. There'll be questions and comments that we can definitely take at the end, or we'll be sure to put in my email address and the email address for our info mailbox where you can ask questions and get one-on-one assistance. And that's why we ask you to refrain from disclosing personal details. And, we can get it more into specifics of your child's case if we talk one-on-one. Let us know for sure if you have any accessibility needs or need help turning on closed captioning before everything begins. So today we're going to look at the steps and the data needed to understand effective progress monitoring. And that's a big one. It's important, and it's going to help with so many other things. But we're also going to learn about different types of data and how this can help teams with goal writing, program planning, and ESY. So we'll start with an example of Brandon, who has autism. His teachers notified the parents that last week his grades are slipping and he may be pulled from his classroom, ouch, for extra learning support. His family is concerned about having him pulled out without having reviewed the data to find out how he's progressing on his IEP goals. So why are grades not enough? Because we look at multiple sources of data. Kids are multifaceted, and we get this data from all over the place. So grades in and of themselves aren't really going to tell us the things we need to know. We need to understand more about what kinds of support the student needs to engage in testing or task completion, know specifics about the student. Each student is unique, and we need to consider their unique circumstances. Grades don't tell us what skills kids need to be developed. We get this through the evaluation that is done for our kids. And that's where the information comes from, not from the grades. We need to know specifically, you look at some of those the testing that's done for our kids, and there's these subsets and subgroups about things that were tested on. So, with reading, there's multiple foundations of reading. Kids might excel in one. My son was a great fluent reader. He could read all the words, but when it came to comprehension, he had great difficulty. So the evaluation that our kids get is going to break that down. And the way grading is weighted may involve biases in ways that don't reveal student strengths and needs. So that's a lot of words to say. Grades aren't going to tell us the whole story. When kids are in elementary school, I remember our kids would get points for bringing in a box of Kleenex. Does that tell how well he's doing in reading? No. So we look at grading as more subjective, especially in those younger grades. And it's not comparing what a child knows to his peers. It's not telling us about achievement. So that's what we want to look for. It's more about effort than it is about achievement. So why is data-driven decision making so important? Um, because we need to rely on data. This is what, you know, this is what the schools use to rely on decision making. And it's what we have to kind of train ourselves to think about when we're talking about decision making. When we talk about our kids at an IEP meeting, something might sound like a good idea, but what's going to make that really stick is if you can come to them and say, look, when he's in the summertime, when he's not engaged with peers, he's not talking to other students. Um, and that's qualitative data. We'll talk more about that throughout the session, but that qualitative data is telling them things they don't know when they're not around, when the school team isn't around. But when the parent team is, involved in those observations, we're able to explain to them and use that data to tell them why certain things might be needed. And we use multiple sources to be objective. Remember, I said the Kleenex boxes, that was subjective. Objectively determine the effectiveness of specialized instruction and the next steps for instructional planning. What's going to ensure that our kids are making progress? And again, we talk about that qualitative data. Don't think you don't have anything to share as the parent, because you sure do. Again, if we think of extended school year, those 2.5 months where we're with our kids, we're seeing our kids much more often than than during the school year. We know what's going on. We know, I think about my son who's on the autism spectrum, and during the summer he would, you know, more often than when he was in school, um, be doing things alone, or um, be gaming more than involved with other kids. So that was things I could report back to the school, that indeed he was, regressing during these times in the summer when he wasn't engaged with other peers. So qualitative, and try and keep these things in mind, or at least, call back, where to find the info. Qualitative data, as opposed to quantitative meaning quantity, number. Qualitative is based on interpretation. It's descriptive, so we can explain what the data looks like. And it's related to language. It's us telling them. So it's just as important, and it is something you should share with the IEP team to explain your child's needs, and it's just as valuable. So talk about progress monitoring. Again, not something to be scared of, but it is something we have to know more about. So what kind of data is needed? We need data for information for present ed levels. In the IEP, the first section, one of the first sections, when we get to the lengthy part, is talking about present ed levels. Where is the child right now? Where is the child based on where peers are? And that's what's going to start the development of the IEP. So data can also find, now all kids have strengths, right? All kids have strengths. Those should be shared initially by the IEP team. We're not talking about, all of the issues or, difficulties that the child's having. Let's identify those strengths. What does the child have to rely on that he does well? And all kids have strengths. So data can help us identify hidden strengths, strengths that, if you have a typical peer who can, use verbal communication, maybe they can tell what they know. But if our kids don't have that, how are they going to share what they know? So we look at things like augmentative communication, universal design for learning, where kids on various levels are all taught in the same classroom using universal design for learning, where the teacher can teach to all different levels in one classroom, or modified instructional materials. It's going to look different based on the circumstances of the student. Now, data collection has to be effective, right? Gathering the data has to be effective. So we look to them to use multiple methods to gather information. Remember when your child was first diagnosed, we talked about a multidisciplinary evaluation. So it's going to come from different places. It's going to look different. There might be some formal testing. Some kids don't do good with formal testing. So we might do some observations. We might have like a rubric, certain things that we want to check off when the child's able to accomplish them. And they need to be collected in multiple settings. They're, kids who, they love the gym class, but put them in a math class, and there's going to be some struggle because gym is a preferred class and math might not be. So they're going to behave differently, act differently, show different levels of knowledge in both of those classes. So it has to be in multiple settings. Maybe they do better in the morning than in the afternoon. Again, multiple settings. What do those different environments mean? Planning and assessment for individualized instruction. So again, we're using multiple sources of data across everyday learning and extracurricular activities. If schools are supporting a student in extracurricular activities, which they should if that's a need of the student, then this is a place where we can take data too. This is a place for those, spontaneous interactions of social skills. And if the child, if we're collecting that kind of data, this would be the perfect place to do it. And how can data be collected easily during different areas of the school day and by different people? So you might have a paraprofessional that's collecting the data. You might have a teacher that's collecting the data. And they should be able to share with you, the parent, how that's being collected. You might have some input into maybe that the child responds differently to different individuals. So that's something that might want to be considered by the team. Ongoing data collection used to continuously support the child's progress over time. Often we say, that the IEP is a fluid document. It's always changing. It can always be changed. There's nothing about an IEP that is set in stone. So that's why we take ongoing data collection, because should the data show us that there needs to be a change in the IEP, we can do that as soon as it's needed. Again, don't be scared of data. So what kind of data is needed? Functional, activities of daily living, things that the child is doing, social skills, behavior. It has to be measurable. Of course, everything, when we're talking about data, it's all got to be measurable. And within reach goals and objectives across settings. So within reach, again, we talk about, the unique circumstances of the child and what would be reasonable for a goal. So we look to those current levels of performance and maybe past IEP goals to help determine what's this measurable annual goal going to look like. We look at in specialized instruction, accommodations, modifications, interests, and preference to help determine what kind of support the student was going to need. And again, it's a fluid document, can change anytime. If the student has met a goal, and through data, we're able to tell that the student has met the goal, has mastered the goal, meaning he does it the majority of the time, then we can change that goal at any time. We don't have to wait for the annual. We don't have to wait for the yearly evaluation or the yearly IEP meeting. We can change that as it's met. We also want to think about SMART goals. If you're familiar with the website rightslaw.com, WRIGHTSLAW. Peter Wright refers to SMART goals. Goals being specific, specifically what needs to be done, measurable, meaning observable, achievable, so they're realistic and attainable based on the individual needs of the student, relevant, they line up with the student's individual needs, and time-bound, a clear deadline for achievement in the IEP. So these are annual goals, so it would be within a year. Okay, this is my favorite part, only because for so long, I had no idea. Well, how do you make a goal? How do you write a goal? It seemed like such a foreign concept to me. And then I went to a training held by PATN, the Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network, and it clicked because of the instructor laid it out in a way that was understandable. So very basically, there are 4 parts to a goal. The condition, what's going to happen, what's going to look like. The student's name, and this is important to ensure that it's individualized to the student. How many times have you picked up an IEP that had someone else's name on it? So let's include the student. Clearly defined behavior. On this one, I like to talk about the dead man test. Have you heard of the dead man test? So if a dead man can do it, then it's not a good goal. You want action. You want to see, what can the student do? We don't want to say he's going to refrain from bad language. Can a dead man refrain from bad language? Yeah, he doesn't say anything. So we want to know what the student will do. And performance criteria. Now you'll see that we break up the performance criteria into 3 different parts. And there's one part, I'll let you know a secret. There's one part that I would say 80% of the IEPs that I review is missing. So you guys want to make sure that that part is in the goal to ensure that we're collecting good data. So the condition. This describes the situation, where the child will be, what we expect them to do. Given visual cues during independent practice in math, using a self-monitoring checklist. These things, if a stranger were to pick up the IEP and have to ensure that this goal is being followed in the day, we don't want them to have any questions. Okay, so this is the condition. This is what we're going to set up to happen. Another example, using passages from content area classes. This hopefully the substitute then would know exactly where they have to go to get that information. Given a writing prompt, using a checklist of tasks on a job site. These are the things that describe what the child's going to do. And again, using the name. Individualized, we wanted to include the child's name. I think a really important reminder here is that because of special education, the way the law is written, what's expected, goals are not to be the same year to year. That means that free appropriate public education was not provided because there's been no progress. Goals have to change year to year to ensure that a student is making progress. A child is entitled by IDA to make progress throughout the year. So we want a clearly defined behavior. What do we want the student to do? This has to be observable. We have to be able to see it. You can't see understanding. You can't see increase. So those words are going to, if they're going to use those words, they have to be matched up with how are we going to see understanding? How are we going to see increase? So what's that going to look like? And again, it has to be something we see. Some examples here: locate, name, and for comprehension, sometimes we say that the child will be able to, you know, verbalize the W questions, who, what, where, why. So that's an idea. There is the, now SAS means two different things in education in Pennsylvania. In this case, it is not supplemental aids and services, but it's standard aligned something, look it up. The SAS portal is a valuable resource to aid in writing goals. This tells where students are supposed to be. Okay, this is my favorite part, performance criteria. So the components have to be in that goal, in that IEP goal. And the way that it's written, you're going to want to look for each one of these things. So the criterion level here is how well the student's going to do. What level of mastery? What's going to be considered mastery? How much time? How many numbers of times? How many words per minute? This is what we're looking for a criteria level. When the child reaches this level, that's going to mean, this is what we look for as far as of meeting the goal, making progress. They're at this point. This is the number of times the behavior must be performed to reach mastery. So if a student's working on a goal and they do it one time, does that mean, okay, let's move on, next goal? No, they did it one time. What has to happen for the student is that they have to have mastered the goal. So in this specific IEP team, for this specific student, what's that going to look like for this student? How many times do they have to do this in succession, consecutively, to show that they've really got this? And that's what the team has to come up with. 5 out of 6 trials, 8 consecutive days, 4 out of 5 weeks. This is what we mean when we say we're looking for mastery. Now you might say, oh, that's the end. Okay, no more criterion level, no more performance data. But no, what we have to know is how frequently the student will be assessed. This is the part that's missing on so many IEPs, and that isn't considered. What has to happen is that throughout the 9-week period, there's going to be specific assessment of the student. Specific probes are going to be taken on this goal to see how the instruction is working. That's what the probe's going to tell us. Is the instruction being given working for the student? Is it ensuring that he's making progress? So if they do it twice in a 9-week period, is that going to tell us anything? It's not, because all we have would be 2 data points. And you have a line from here to here. That's not going to tell us how well a student's doing or how poorly they're doing. What we have to look for is what we want to happen is we want the student to receive instruction and then do a probe to see how well that instruction worked. And then we're going to take that data. And then there's going to be more instruction based on the IEP, more instruction, and take a probe to see how well that worked. And then we're going to provide some more instruction and then a probe to see how well that worked. Now you can see that only having 2 data points in a 9-week period, or when they're going to report it to the parent, is not going to give us as a parent the information that we need to say, oh, yep, he's making progress. Whatever's appropriate for that student, we have to see how he's doing responding to the instruction. And that's the purpose of progress monitoring. So if the student is, let's say they do well one week and don't do as well the next week, and don't do as well the next week, we can identify quickly what has to be changed. The teacher can identify what has to be changed. Why is this student not making progress? That's why we can't only have 2 assessments, 2 probes during the 9-week period. Because it'll be all the way at the end of the 9-week period before we find out, oh, we got to change instruction. Something here's not working. So it doesn't have to be every week, but let's give some time for that instruction to occur and then do a probe or an assessment to determine, did that work? And then at the end of the 9-week period, you should get progress monitoring notes or progress monitoring report that's going to tell you, how did you do during the 9-week period? There's no reason, this is 2024, there's no reason that you shouldn't have a graph that goes along with the data to show you as the parent who's entitled to be a fully informed decision maker what his progress looked like during that 9-week period. So all they'd have to do is match up their data, put it on a graph, and show you what progress, regression, or maintenance of skills looks like. So that's why this part is so important. How many times during that 9-week period is the student going to be assessed? Now you might have, the IEP team say, oh, well, we take data every day. That's fantastic. But what I'm looking for is how effective is the instruction that they're being provided over that time. So take your data, but I want to probe specific to the IEP that's showing how well the instruction's working, or if it's not working. That's what we're looking for. So these are questions to ask ourselves regarding functional goals and inclusion to ensure that inclusion is happening while the student is able to work on those functional skills. And again, with supports and services, all of these things can happen within the gen ed classroom. Something to keep in mind. Okay, we're doing good on timing because here we come to extended school year and how the data works here. So, extended school year. We have an idea of what we know that it means. It's special education related services provided to students beyond the 180-day school year. So typically, we understand this to mean during those 2.5 months where in Pennsylvania, where students are not in school. But for some students, that may be a weekend. For some students, that may be the time until they're in school again. It's all dependent on the individual needs of the student. Okay, so the basics of extended school year, now you'll hear sometimes that schools will rely only on these 2 things, but the basics of extended school year are a student losing many of the skills that they learned during the school year when they're provided, repetition and provided support. And the second part, taking longer than typical to get those skills back once school begins again. Now, that's just the basis. That's not only what extended school year is based on. So each local education agency, each school district has to provide extended school year to students that need it. It has to be in accordance with the student's IEP. It has to be individualized and at no cost to the parent or the family. So all students who have an IEP, their IEP team must consider ESY. It's not something to be ignored. Each team has to discuss if this is something the student needs. And if there is discussion and the team decides the student may need this, then we have to follow up with data. If the team says we don't believe the child needs this, if there's disagreement, you as a parent may say, we need to have data. So there should be no reason that collecting data should be a problem for explaining the need for extended school year. And any data that comes from the school regarding extended school year, as a parent, you're entitled to. I'll probably want to bring that up again sometime. So to be eligible for, I'm seeing that my screen here is a little in the way. To determine the student's eligibility, the team has to, number one, identify specific IEP goals that are going to be ESY goals, goals where we think that the child's going to regress in these skills or may have trouble with recouping these skills. Identify those specific goals as ESY goals. Evaluate the student to see if they regress during a break. So typically this is, during a long break like the winter break. Some students we can look at, the last day of one school year and the beginning of the next school year and take data there to see if any of these things were occurring. And the idea then is to choose a program that will allow the student to maintain progress on goals. Important to remember that extended school year is not where we're looking for making progress. It's for maintaining skills, keeping them at the level they're at now. And we use the IEP goals as data to ensure that that happens. So when is the IEP or the ESY decision made? For a certain group of students, these are called targeted or Armstrong target group. This is Pennsylvania. The decision is made at an IEP meeting held no later than February 28th as far as eligibility. Now, the whole purpose of this is so if the family disagrees, they have the time to resolve the issue with the school. So February 28th, we're going to have most times the schools are going to call you. But what should have, and you can have, you can have an IEP meeting without actually physically coming in place. If the teacher calls and says, okay, your child is eligible for IEP or for ESY, then the meeting's done. But if they, have a meeting and say they aren't eligible, you have the right to disagree with that decision. Use your procedural safeguards, a meeting, mediation, due process to say, no, he absolutely needs extended school year. And then rely on that data to make your point. So we're looking for an IEP meeting to be held by February 28th. By March 31st, the NORAP has to be issued. Notice of recommended educational placement has to be issued that the student is eligible for extended school year. And then that document will also indicate what placement the student has for extended school year. What's that going to look like? Okay. Again, any questions about that? We can talk about it. For other students who aren't in that, no, I didn't mention what the target group was. So the target group includes students who have severe disability. This is, definition that's, Heather's going to share the ESY guide from Patton, really helpful guide in understanding all of these aspects that we're just glossing over today as far as ESY. Target Armstrong group or the Armstrong target group includes students with emotional disturbance, autism, moderate to severe level of intellectual disability, or multiple disability. So again, kind of vague, not real descriptive, but using data, we can show need for our child. So for other students who aren't in the Armstrong group, a decision is made early enough that the team can make a decision about programming that will be used for extended school year. Again, the Armstrong group was in place so that families have the opportunity to disagree if they do and pursue their procedural safeguards to make decisions. So this is the information that we should be thinking about when we're thinking, should this child receive extended school year? And again, we go back to that data. So what did the progress and the performance look like on their IEP goals throughout the school year? Was it a big struggle just to make small gains? Did the student, I don't like when they say inconsistent, because that's more about the person taking the data than it is about the student themselves. So, did it look like it was inconsistent? And again, we rely on that data, observations, what you see at home, again, before and after breaks in the educational program. And again, for some students, this could be what happens, overnight. What does he lose overnight that he has trouble gaining the next day? And information from teachers, therapists, parents and caregivers, specialists that you might have coming into the home that can give some of that qualitative data. You're the ones that are there during those times, so that's the information you share. The school can't be given, information or data on the times when they're not there. So as an example, Juanita has a goal in her IEP about increasing her reading skills. She's made progress on this goal, but after summer break, some of her progress is lost. And it takes 6 weeks into the new school year until her skills are back to where they were before the end of this, or at the end of the last school year. So there's the data that was taken. And again, the data that's from June to September, I mean, we can, as parents, we can provide data at any time, but your information is going to be critical there. Information that you have or observations you made is going to be really important, whether it's about reading, whether it's about behavior, whether it's about independent living skills. And I wouldn't rely, and just because we say this, as advocates, keep it in writing. You can mention this at a meeting, but what's going to be really helpful and ensure that it's considered is to write what you've observed during the summer and your qualitative data to share with the school. So this is an example of, what happened when she had extended school year, and that's in the green, and then when there was no ESY provided for Juanita. And you can see the differences, how she was able to make progress and then have less trouble with recoupment once she gets back to school. Now, earlier I had mentioned that, so often schools rely on that regression and recoupment as a reason to either find a student eligible or not for extended school year. And in fact, there are 7 criteria for extended school year. And if you read in that extended school year guide, sometimes one is enough. Other times we'd be looking at multiple factors that would make a student eligible or not for extended school year. Many times basing this on, guess what? Data. So all factors have to be considered. And often though schools might write in the IEP that they only looked at regression and recoupment, which is not appropriate and doesn't take into account the fact that there are other data that have to be looked at. Let's look at what those are. So regression on its own. Does a student regress during a long break? Measurable decreases in skills and behaviors. We'll talk about this later too. Decreases caused by that interruption in educational programming. And then there's recoupment. Does the child take a long time to catch up when they go back to school? Now, most students will lose some skills over the summer or over longer breaks. But, with that, oftentimes we, look at our student or our kids starting school again, and it's kind of a first couple weeks might be a rehash of what they learned end of last year. For some students, that takes even longer. So that's losing out then on academic skills that kids are learning now. So we want to make sure that that doesn't happen. And then taking the two together, regression and recoupment happening, which is going to make more of an impact on new material they need to learn. Mastery of a skill. Will the student's chances of learning a skill or behavior be reduced during a break in service? Let's say they're just at the cusp of learning something, and this break is going to probably ensure that they're not going to get make that jump over that last barrier that they have in mastering the skill. So that's something to consider. Again, your qualitative data is going to help in this. Let's say we're talking about toileting and the student almost has it, and then summer break occurs. Well, not having that consistency of the school day or that routine when they were, always going during certain times of the day, that might be a need then for extended school year. And again, more of a description. If the students had a critical stage for mastering a skill, especially around self-sufficiency and independence, do they need extended school year? Our example here about a student making requests, and in December, a child was, making requests, but after winter break, the student didn't return to levels until February. So, these are important goals, and these are we talked before about IEP goals being identified as extended school year goals. These are the kind of things we're talking about. Goals of self-sufficiency and independence that may be measured then for recoupment and regression. I hope that makes sense. Successive interruptions. If the students are interrupted from the learning process, are they going to have more a difficult time in making progress or recouping their skills? So these repeated breaks can lead the student to withdrawing from the learning process. And if that happens, another eligibility criteria for extended school year. And again, like we mentioned, members of the Armstrong target group, that must be considered during eligibility. Is the student in that group, do they have one of those disabilities that are typically going to show more regression recoupment issues? And for that reason, should they receive extended school year? Again, it's your right as a parent to be a fully informed decision maker and request any data you want to see, even if it's just to say, okay, that's fine. I accept I accept the school's decision of eligibility, but I'd like to see the data that you took and, what does it look like? That's your right. It's not questioning, their work. It's just wanting to see it for yourself. You have a right to do that. And the more you get comfortable around data and asking those kind of questions, the easier it gets. And the more you find about making the decisions for your child. So I'm not going to go over these. There were some examples that you saw there, and you really can't tell without data what decision a school would make. We can look at those examples and say, oh yeah, they should get it. And the school might have data that shows, nope, he's not eligible. So I don't even want to entertain those scenarios, just because you say, well, my child had that and he didn't get it. And that's, again, that's the nature of the data. It's going to show us those things. Let's get back to ESY. We're doing good on time. So if the child has been determined to be eligible for extended school year, those specifics have to be included in the IEP. Now, they might not be included in February when that eligibility decision is made, just because the team still has a month to talk about, and that's, it's still kind of early. For folks that are newer to the process, information about ESY programming is starting to come out in February. So, waiting lists are always something to consider. The notice of recommended educational placement, the NOREP, is going to indicate where the team decides on placement and should be issued to the parent no later than March 31st. Again, to give that opportunity to disagree and resolve whatever, the school might determine. So know that this is where you're going to find it on the IEP. This is what it looks like on the IEP. One box is going to be marked. Now, you'll see that some schools, they will mark this part in September or when the team is writing. As of this date, the IEP, the student is not eligible for extended school year. And that's fine, but know that, as the parent, this is temporary. Again, it's a fluid document. It can be changed at any time. So, come end of February and we're making this consideration, talking about eligibility, there is an opportunity for the team to change it to student is eligible for extended school year. So if you see it marked, in September, that it says the student is not eligible, you might say to the other members of the IEP team, I'm assuming that this is a fluid document. We can talk about this more later. Just so, you can assert what you know. Being assertive is good, aggressive, no. And then it's expected that the team will write which annual goals are addressed in the ESY program. And there should be some indication on the IEP at all times. It's going to let everyone know which goals in the IEP are the ESY goals that the student is being monitored for and will work on during ESY. So somehow that has to be marked in the IEP document itself. Okay, and then we have the grid at the bottom, the service that's going to be provided, where it's going to be provided, the frequency. I often hear of families, oh, my child's getting so many hours, or my child's getting so many days or weeks. Again, you should find this appropriate. If it's indicated as hours, and it seems like a small number, again, let's look at the data. And is that a number that's really going to work for this child? This ESY isn't, a blanket service that's just offered to all of these students, and these students who need this get this. ESY is individualized. So if the school says, oh, we have an ESY program at our school, and that's what kids get who get ESY. This isn't appropriate and maybe non-compliance because ESY is individualized, same as anything else is individualized. The goals on my son's IEP that were identified for extended school year were all around social and behavioral. And his placement during the school year was inclusive, so it was with typical peers. Now, during the summer, in our school, there wasn't a program that would work on his social and behavioral needs that included typical peers. So what that meant was our IEP team had to think about where will this service be provided? What kind of service would be appropriate for him? Well, you think about what kind of service, what kind of activities, what kind of programming is available during the summer, includes typical peers, works on socialization and behavior. The idea was a day camp. And because of the goals that were identified for Andrew, and because of the fact that he was in an inclusive setting all during the school year, and needed that setting, and that setting still had to be provided in extended school year, school and I agreed to a day program where he'd get the support that he needed. For him at that time, it included one-on-one support at a day camp, included transportation, because it has to. So those are the things you want to think about. It doesn't have to only include what the school offers, if what the school offers isn't appropriate for the needs of the student. Looking at what can be provided, again, based on need, individual need of the student, not the needs of the school. They can address areas in self-help, social, academic, behavioral, vocational, related services. If a child needs speech services throughout the summer, or they're going to really regress and have trouble with recoupment come the new school year, this is something that shall also be considered for extended school year. The ESY section is going to include, like we just went over, goals, description of services, frequency, location, dates, and all related services that might need to be provided. And again, if we haven't emphasized it enough, depending on the needs of the student, the IEP goals can be addressed in different ways, either group or individualized, school, home, or community-based activities, again, whatever's appropriate for the student. May include related services if needed, and have to be provided by the LEA, or if not provided by the LEA, they're still responsible to contract with somebody who's going to provide the services. So, when Andrew went to the day camp, the school paid for the camp because the school was still responsible to pay for the activity. Free appropriate public education, right? So I told you it was going to be a long one. Not a lot of time for questions. Heather, is there anything in the chat?
I didn't see a ton of questions in the chat, although I got kicked off at one point, so I can only go back so far.
Okay. Know that the family resource specialists are always here available for you at the Peel Center. Talk about extended school year. This is the time we really want to start thinking about it, because during that 2-week break, the school is going to be they should be taking data now or have data available about where the student's at. And then when the students return in January, they're going to be taking data on, how much was lost during that time. How long is it taking the student to recoup what they did lose? All of those things are going to be talked about. And again, you have data. You could have quantitative data too. If you're at home and, you have a rubric of, how many interactions your child is having with, the peer down the street, and you see, you collect data, feel free. And then be sure to share that with the school. And again, I want to emphasize, I would do that in writing, just because, you can go back to it. You can use that for evidence and documentation should you need it at any time. Now, we have an
Cindy, we have a
evaluation.
couple of questions in the chat now.
Ah, okay.
So,
Well,
can you give a clear example of a SMART goal?
Not my strong suit, not a teacher. I'm a parent. So, I would take a look at Pete Wright's email or his website to get those examples of the SMART goals. There's a lot of other people out there that can write them better than me. So I would take a look there. There's also sometimes you'll find goal banks. Now these, I wouldn't necessarily say these goal banks are well-written goals, but that they will be able to give you an idea of those conditions, or not necessarily even the criteria, but what are we looking for as far as a student making progress? So I'm sorry, not my area of expertise. I can tell you what they're supposed to contain, but coming up with them, I'm not going to do you any favors there. Anything else, Heather?
Um, do, 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 do. How can parents request the graphs from the data collected?
That's a great question. So if you're not getting that in your progress monitoring, again, in writing, I would ask for the data to be put on a graph. Most folks know that using Excel or, using the computer, it's not difficult to have, data and have it put onto a graph. That's all we're asking for. And it's a visual for us to be able to participate as parents in decision making. It ensures that we are informed decision makers. So, we have that right to do that. And again, it's okay to be assertive, to ask for these things. It's not unreasonable. Um, we're not going to climb over tables and, ask for it that way, but be sure to, it takes a learning sometimes to do that, to feel comfortable doing it. But, the information is there. If the information's not there, that's another problem. And that's something that, we can help you, the family resource specialist can help you address. But, we need to see that as a parent. That's how we're going to understand the data. I saw Kateri had her hand up and I'm thinking, she might have a question that's helpful for the whole group. Kateri's one of our family resource specialists.
Hi Sandy. I was just responding to the parent that was asking for examples of the SMART goals. Saw Heather put a link in there from Wright's Law, but also the resources she put in the beginning, the writing effective IEP goals.
Yeah.
There are examples within that resource, and they also break down the components of an effective goal. And that is worth your time to read. For parents that are here, it certainly has been helpful to me personally as well. So that would be one that I would encourage to do. But be clear about what is the skill that they're working on and use it as a check sheet when you're reading your IEPs. If they don't have those components to the goal, then the goal is not measurable. So that means you're not going to get appropriate data on whether or not your child is making progress. So
That's
spend some time. It's front and back, but if you don't understand, as Cindy said, family resource specialists are here to help you. Give us a call and we can sit down and work with you individually about your kids, specific, goals and help you to understand it. But that is a good place to start when you're trying to understand it. And it's in the IEP document itself. I point it out all the time. Like read, it says annual goal, those criteria are right under there in the little small print. It's there as well. So that
great
would be
reminder.
a resource that I would
Thanks,
suggest
Kateri.
that you start with, as well as the Wright's Law one.
Thanks, Kateri. Good reminder. And, just those are helpful documents, and Patent itself is a good resource for families, PATTAN.net, Pennsylvania Training and Technical Assistance Network. And that website is to be used by parents as well as schools to help us understand, specifics about special education or what our rights are. So take a look there, find some information that's helpful for you too. Kateri and our other FRS and me, we're all available to you at any time. Answer your questions, figure things out. So feel free to give us a call. Heather's going to send a follow-up with the PowerPoint and with the evaluation info. And we thank you for joining us and look for some more winter bites throughout the season. Thanks, everyone.